How's this for an intro? Name a better duo than the Montreal Canadiens and sending over talented, goal-scoring forwards to the Washington Capitals. Okay, maybe it's not that good of an intro, but this is something that I do feel is worth talking about because it was mentioned on TSN Insider Trading a few days ago on Thursday. Take a look at this tweet made by NHL Watcher. It kind of goes over what Pierre LeBrun talks about in the show. LeBrun on Insider Trading says the Canadiens have called teams about their gluttony of forwards up front, whether that be Dadonov, Drouin, or Hoffman. One of the teams they have had contact with is the Capitals, but as of right now, the Caps want to look internally to fill their holes. Now, this is a pretty simple tweet. It's kind of interesting how we're making an entire video about this thing, but when it comes to the idea of the Canadiens calling other teams about their scorers, and I say scorers because Dadonov, Hoffman, I guess you could say they're goal-scoring players, Drouin is a playmaker. When it comes to the Canadiens contacting other teams about these guys, it's not necessarily the most surprising thing in the world to hear about. We had been hearing ever since Dadonov was sent over to Montreal, hey, this guy could be a trade chip. If he goes over, he scores 15 goals, 20 goals by the trade deadline, the Canadiens could actually get themselves some pretty good fodder and send him to a team that could use his services in the playoffs. Same could be said about Mike Hoffman, and I guess you could say the same thing has been sort of thrown around here and there about Drouin. It's actually kind of unfortunate, in my opinion, hearing everything with Drouin, because I was kind of buying in to the Gatorade right there, saying that this could be the resurgence year that Drouin really needed, but lo and behold, he's not playing some games, he's not really producing other games, and sure, while he has a nice point once in a while where he makes a nice read and a nice pass, Jonathan Drouin is still Jonathan Drouin, and I don't think there's really much fodder there to believe that any significant change is on the horizon in the short term. But either way, the reason why I talked about the Canadiens and the Capitals in the way I did in the intro is because when I think about the Canadiens sending over a guy like a Drouin, who isn't necessarily the most talented player, or he's really talented, it's just you don't see it all too often, who expires in 2023. When I think about the team sending over a guy like Mike Hoffman, who is expiring next year, he's making 4.5 AAV, and when Hoffman is at his best, he is indeed a lethal goal-scoring threat. It's just with the Canadiens, he hasn't really been that all too much. And then you have yourselves, of course, Evgeny Dadonov, who has played 8 games and he actually has 0 points on the season. When he is at his best, he is a 20-goal-ish caliber guy, like he had been the past few seasons with Vegas, Florida, and I'm just going to skip over the Ottawa year entirely. When I think about any of these guys going over to Washington, I think about the last time the Canadiens and the Caps made a trade, exchanging an expiring forward to help out Washington in the postseason. Does anybody remember Ilya Kovalchuk? The Canadiens got themselves one of the best resurgence stories in the NHL in Kovalchuk. He was an absolute beast. He helped Suzuki mold himself into the player that he is today, and then he got sent over to Washington for, I believe it was a 3rd-round pick. And even though Canadiens fans absolutely loved Kovalchuk in the very short stint that he was here, they all kind of understood, okay, this is not a long-term thing. This is just a resurgence story. This is a revival of one's career. He's not really going to help us out in the playoffs because we're not going to make the playoffs, so let's just ship him off. He'll go to another team and we can get a draft pick in return. Capiche? It worked out really well. And even though Kovalchuk wasn't the same domineering force that he was in Montreal, in Washington, there still was some value the Canadiens got there. It's just, right now, when you're talking about these 3 guys, Drouin, Hoffman, and Dadonov, if any team is going to go out there and trade for any of these players, especially like a Mike Hoffman, for example, who's making 4.5 for an extra season after this year, you're going to really have to believe in the potential that these guys have. Because so far, I mean, each of these 3 guys have not really been too impressive for the Montreal Canadiens in the short stint they have had to kick off 22-23. However, when it comes to the Capitals apparently not necessarily wanting to reach out and kind of just trying to look internally instead for the answers, I could totally understand why they would want to explore their own organization instead of going through to somebody else in a trade, especially this early on in the season, of course. And the reason for that is because the Caps do have some guys that I do believe in quite thoroughly to inevitably become capable NHL players. You still have some guys on the LTIR. Of course, Backstrom is there, Connor Brown, Carl Hagelin. Tom Wilson isn't available right now. TJ Oshie isn't available right now. This team is kind of riddled with injuries at the moment. But then you go down to their non-roster forwards and you see, hey, Hendrix Lapierre is right here. Henrik Borgstrom is right here. These are guys that I definitely do think have a lot of potential into the long term. And if you wanted to say, okay, maybe we could toss you into some NHL action earlier on and help you assimilate yourself into National Hockey League play sooner rather than later, maybe a depth role is something that could be useful in that respect in the playoffs of 2023. If we could get the same quality of play that a guy like Mike Hoffman would provide, which isn't really all too great at the moment, I will admit, while keeping our draft picks and everything so we don't send another third over to Montreal, that probably is the best case scenario. It's just a question as to whether or not the players the Capitals have in their system are worth it to actually throw into an NHL game once in a while, let alone for an entire playoff run, for example. It is interesting to me, though, thinking about what a Canadiens line like this could look like in Washington. Not line like the three players, but just any of these guys. I'm thinking about Jonathan Drouin and his playmaking. What if you tried to pair that with an Alex Ovechkin? I know you've got Kuznetsov, I know you've got Backstrom. These guys have been Ovi's primary playmaker for years, but Jonathan Drouin is just coming back, and we all kind of know that he has had that playmaking side to his game. He can make some really beautiful passes from the bottom corner of the offensive zone near the blue line right through everybody backdoor. He's done that several times already in the few years he has had in Montreal. I'm thinking of what a guy like Ovechkin could potentially see when a guy like Drouin is feeding him the puck. You want to talk about Russian goal scorers coming over to Washington to help out Ovi? You have seen this pattern in the past. Fedorov was over there. Of course, there was Kovalchuk. Maybe Dadonov could be somebody next in that queue. I'm not really too sure. Mike Hoffman is a guy that's bounced around from team to team to team, and he has always been a very consistent goal scorer. I mean, he was always getting 30, 25-plus goals every season until recently, where he had played in Montreal and hasn't really produced that same amount of goals on the year. But still, there could be some value depending on who you ask, and I know a lot of Canadiens fans are so against Mike Hoffman right now because the guy keeps on passing the puck into skates and he doesn't really make the right reads on the power play, but he is that bottom right-hand corner guy for a reason. So we'll see what exactly the Canadiens do. Of course, Washington is just one team out of 30 other NHL teams that exist out there. So, of course, if the Canadiens are going out there and shopping these three players, there's probably a few other teams and GMs out there that have gotten calls about them. It's just for some reason Washington is the one that popped up here when Pierre LeBrun talked about it on Insider Trading. So, talk in the comments your thoughts about these three guys, Jonathan Drouin, Mike Hoffman, Evgeny Dadonov. What are your thoughts about them? 1, 2, or maybe even all three, who really knows, getting sent over to the Washington Capitals. And if you're a Caps fan and you don't want to do something like this, who in your organization could fill up that sort of role without you having to make a trade? Do you say, okay, screw it, we'll just give Hendrix Lapierre the ability to try out and maybe fill in that role before trading for a guy like Drouin? Maybe we just promote Connor McMichael. Maybe we go out there and just wait. We've got a lot of guys on the IR, so when everybody comes back, then we don't really need to make a trade anymore. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Capitals and their progression with forwards. Do they make this trade? If it is a trade that you think needs to be accomplished, what is the max you would be willing to give up for a guy like Drouin? If you're a Canadiens fan, what is the least amount of assets that you would receive for any of these players that would actually satisfy you in that respect? Okay, if we trade Drouin away, I don't want anything less than a third-round pick, for example. I mean, honestly, I feel like Drouin might be able to, or he should be able to, fetch a little bit more, especially if you retain salary. But either way, all your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj 9, and bye.